Simi hummed along to the Sunday morning hymn, the tune flowing through the crowded church like a familiar friend. At 22, she was a vibrant young woman, her smile bright as sunshine, her eyes full of dreams, and her future with Femi, her boyfriend of 2 years, sparkling ahead. They were a perfect pair, their laughter filling the air, and they had plans for a bakery showing their shared love and ambition. In church, she loved to sit in the front row so that she doesn't get distracted and listen attentively to the day's sermon. She was brought up as a good Christian and believed in doing the right things. But today, something felt off. A guest pastor, Daniel, was invited to give the sermon. His powerful and captivating voice echoed through the church, telling stories of faith and redemption. As Simi watched him command the pulpit, a chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The next Sunday, Pastor Daniel was staring directly at her all through his sermon, and his gaze lingered on her a bit too long, making her feel uncomfortable and uneasy. After service, the usual post-sermon bustle and hustle in the church, Simi, still buzzing from the powerful sermon, made her way to the exit, forgetting her usual Sunday greetings. Suddenly, a hand touched her from behind on her shoulder. Turning around, she found herself face to face with Pastor Daniel. His eyes, which had captivated the congregation moments ago, now held a disturbing intensity as he looked straight into her eyes. Simisola, he began, his voice with a low rumble that sent shiver down her spine. "The Lord has spoken to me," said Pastor Daniel. Simi blinked, surprised that he knew her name so well, and who told him her name? Then she listened to him. He continued, leaning closer to her, his voice dropping lower so that he could whisper into her ears. "The Lord has shown me a vision," he told Simi, "a future where you stand by my side." Simi scoffed, a little bit pissed off, and then she let herself free from his grasp and headed home. At home, she was angry. She felt the idea was absurd. What right does Pastor Daniel have to tell her that? Femi was the melody to her song, not some charismatic stranger with an intense gaze. Yet, a seed of doubts planted by Pastor Daniel's word took root in her mind. The following weeks became restless as Pastor Daniel continued bombarding her with a series of text messages that felt more like a prophecy than greeting, each one chipping away at her relationship with Femi, her boyfriend. He painted a picture of divinely ordained future between both of them, a future where Femi was an obstacle but not a bridge. Simi found herself caught in a web of emotion. Fear, fueled by Pastor Daniel's cryptic pronouncement, wrestled her mind as she was brought up as someone who will always respect the wishes of God. This was the whisper of destiny, driven by Pastor Daniel's unwavering conviction. Simi's world turned upside down. Leaving Femi was the hardest thing she had ever done in her life. Each word she said to Femi broke her heart, tears streaming down her face. And Femi was so angry at what she was going to do. He convinced her that this was not God telling her that why had she not seen it herself? But she told him that this is Pastor Daniel. He's a man of God. I have to respect God's wish. But deep down, she knew that something was off, but she could not place it. But Daniel's constant talk of destiny had drowned out all her doubts. She had been taught to listen to God's word, and since Pastor Daniel claimed to be speaking of God, she felt she had no choice. Soon after, Daniel started treating her as the first lady in his life. He treated her like a queen. In church, he ordered the usher to let her sit by his side when he wasn't preaching. He treated her with care. He often bought her gifts. In church, people were treating her like the first lady because she was now the pastor's fiancée, and she faked a smile, but deep down, she was not comfortable with all of this. Not too long, Pastor Daniel came with a ring, proposing marriage with her, staring at her as he proposed with intensity. Simi was so uneasy with all this. But blinded by the idea of a holy calling and the future filled with righteousness, she said yes grudgingly. The first few months of their marriage was a happy one. They lived a normal life, going to church and living their lives. In church, Daniel's sermons were powerful and the congregation adored him. Simi by his side enjoyed the attention. He was the star, his voice loud with faith, and Simi was a supportive wife, happy to be part of it. Pastor Daniel made her the lead chorister because she sang beautifully. At home, they prayed together, but then small problems started to appear in their marriage. Pastor Daniel's possessiveness of Simi grew. At first, it was subtle, but soon he controlled everything about her. Her clothes, her friends, how she sits in church, who she mingles with, and even her thoughts. The bright color of Simi world faded, replaced by a dull gray thought. Her laugh, once joyful, became rare and nervous. Fear became her constant companion. Sleep eluded her, plagued by nightmare of the congregation accusing her and what they would say about her unhappy marriage. Pastor Daniel, Simi's husband, made her a full-time wife, noting that as a pastor's wife, he needed undivided attention to himself and to his future children. Simi, who used to earn her own money, was not too happy by this decision. And at the end of each month, the church always stocked their home with necessary foodstuffs and groceries, so she didn't need to shop. But Simi was bored to death. Apart from attending to her husband, going to church and praying, Simi had no life. Eventually, she decided to become a content creator. Since she had a laptop, and so she decided to create content. Then life went on for her. Creating content on YouTube was an escape route for her, and she made a decent amount of income. Then one day, her husband, Pastor Daniel, asked her for some money because he knew that she had been saving some money. He said he needed the money for God's work in the church, promising to pay her back. But after some months, he didn't give her the money. And when she asked, he lashed her out with the scripture, noting that women must be submissive to her husband, and why should he ask for the money? This made her so sad. But the borrowing continued, and as he borrowed, he never returned it back. And so Simi stopped creating content on YouTube because she felt that she was making money for her husband and she couldn't spend it on herself. Then one day, her husband came to borrow money from her again, and she said she had no money and that she had stopped creating content. And then he looked at her and then insulted her, calling her a lazy stay-at-home wife who did nothing but ate and did nothing at home. This made her so sad and she cried. Then she noticed that her husband, Pastor Daniel, was always around a young, light-skinned girl who was in the choir with her. Her name was Funke. Whenever she inquired about his closeness with Funke, he would always tell her that he was doing the work of God with her. Then on another day in church, she saw her husband giving Funke a lump sum of money. And when she asked again why, he screamed at her for asking her that question. The comfort and purpose Simi once felt started to disappear. The cage Daniel had built for her was now beginning to choke her as he started manipulating her and also emotionally abusing her. Simi felt trapped. She felt her life was turning into a sad song, a slow descent into darkness that she never imagined. As the years went by, Simi endured emotional abuse from her husband, Pastor Daniel. She also endured continuous complaint from young women who reported her husband sexual harassment of them under the guise of spiritual guidance. He manipulated some of them into affair, branding his wife Simi as a devil who neglected him and never took care of him. When Simi confronted her husband about his infidelity, he then isolated her, cutting her off from friends. He deemed her friends as worldly influences. He didn't want his wife in contact with anyone so that she would not know what he was doing in church. Simi would cry and pray, but the whisper of destiny had turned into a deafening roar of manipulation. Simi felt trapped in a life of pain and misery. As Daniel continued his emotional abuse on her, He would twist the scripture to justify his cruelty on her, belittling Simi for the smallest mistake. As little as a spoon or plate that falls down on the ground, he will shout at her, reducing her self-worth. Then their financial situation became very bad. Daniel spent lavishly on church events, draining the funds like a leaky bucket. He claimed that his vision from God never included Simi working when she requested that she get a job due to their financial situation. He responded coldly to her that all she needed to do was to stay at home like a dutiful wife of a pastor. And then bills began to pile up, hammering into their fragile finances. Simi, who was once full of life, was reduced to juggling between mega funds and trying to keep the home. The monthly food allocation that the church used to give them now became reduced because her husband converted the food to money instead. The grocery bag became lighter, and the house and Simi began to suffer due to financial struggle. Simi's vibrant spirit faded, and she had constant headache and worries. The abuse and isolation had turned her life into a life of suffering, leaving her a shadow of the woman she once knew. Then, one day, she found out that she was pregnant, and she had to keep it quiet to wait a while to tell her husband. Then one night, she told her husband about the pregnancy, but he was not happy to hear the news. And when she confronted him why he was not happy to hear the news of their baby, they got into a heated argument, and Pastor Daniel did not know when he hit her, and she fell and hit her head on the wall and then passed out. When she woke up, she found herself on a bed in the hospital room. The doctor came in apologizing for her miscarriage. She felt sad for losing the baby, but deep down she knew that the baby would have suffered if it were born. When she was discharged and got home, her husband did not act as if she was injured or had a miscarriage. He carried about with his pastoral duty like nothing had happened. This left Simi shaking. She thought about her life, crying softly. She was now a stranger to herself. Her life filled with pain and her spirit broken. This wasn't the life God had planned for her. This was a slow, painful death by 1,000 miles. In her quiet despair, she began to sing a new melody, a melody of survival. One day at church after service, she pretended she was having a normal conversation with a sister in church, Sister Sarah. She told Sarah about everything that she was going through. Sarah was one of her close friends, but her husband did not allow her to speak with Sarah, for he felt that Sarah was an influence in Simi's life. But Simi was pretending to listen to Sarah as if she was advising her on church matters. But Simi was telling her all about her ordeal in the hand of her husband, and Sarah was not happy. Then Sarah told her, "Why don't you leave? Why are you still in this marriage?" And Simi said to her, "But the church will talk, people will talk." And then Sarah said, "Before you were born, people talked. After you were born, people still talked. And when you are gone and died, people will still talk. So, do you want to die and then people will talk about your death? Is that what you want?" With that, Simi's sense came back. With a newfound determination, she knew she needed to escape these painful experiences before it consumed her entirely. Simi realized that she could no longer endure this torment and torture. She had given up her dreams and happiness for a marriage that was nothing. Her emotional scars were deep and financial strain was unbearable. So she decided to escape, but escaping was going to be risky, and she decided to plan it carefully. So one Sunday during service, Simi made her move. In the middle of the service, Simi stood up and walked out of the church with her heart heavier than the bag that she carried. She slipped out of the church when her husband was preaching and went home and packed all her belongings and left for good. Simi found refuge with her friend Sarah, and Sarah was happy to welcome Simi. Sarah knew Simi before Daniel dimmed her light. Sarah's warm embrace was like a soothing melody offering comfort after the chaos of her life with Daniel. Leaving Daniel, her husband, was a painful experience, but she needed a life of love and a life of freedom. The first few weeks was exhausting and emotionally draining because years of abuse had left a deep scar and self-doubt in Simi. But her friend continued to be there, encouraging her that time will heal her. Slowly with each day, Simi's self-worth began to grow loud and louder. She learned to recognize that these challenges that she was going through was a stepping stone to make her stronger. And so she didn't let it break her. So she reconnected with her families and her friends as this was a stepping stone to Simi's healing. The support she got from her friends and family gave her the strength to carry on. But the financial challenge was still there and she needed to get a job. But her skills had grown rusty after years of isolation, therefore making job search difficult. However, Simi was not going to relent. She took menial jobs in restaurants, serving as a waiter. She decided to do this work during the daytime and save money until she was able to buy a laptop and save for 6 months of data. At night after work, she will settle down and start documenting her journey, telling her story on YouTube and offering advice to women one video at a time. After 5 months of posting regular content on YouTube, one of her videos finally picked up and she was able to monetize her YouTube channel. Months later, after consistent posting, she started to make good money as a content creator, and brands started to invite her to talk about women empowerment and what they were going through. Simi never ever dreamed that this day would ever come. Each paycheck she got from YouTube lessened the weight of debts, and slowly she began to become more confident as she also inspired other women. Far from over, because the scar of abuse still remained, but she was no longer a prisoner. She was now a conductor of her own life. Leaving Daniel was the hardest decision she ever made, but it was the beginning of her journey to reclaim her life. As for Daniel, karma caught up with him in a way he never anticipated. His once charismatic facade began to crumble as more and more women came out to tell the church of his manipulation and sexual harassment and abuse. The church then conveyed and then disbanded him and ripped him off of his pastoral duty and pursued him out of the church. The church were disgusted by his behavior. Daniel's troubles did not end there. Shortly after his disgrace, he was struck by a terrible disease. The disease was slow and ate into his body, leaving him weak and helpless. Some people saw it as divine retribution for all the nonsense that he had done. This was punishment from God for his years of deceit and cruelty under the house of God. And his health deteriorated. He lost his charisma, he lost his energy, and he could no longer manipulate or control those around him. In his weakened state, he went to seek forgiveness from Simi and other ex-girlfriends he had manipulated, but no one listened to him. Eventually, he had no choice but to retire to the village. There, he lived the rest of his days in solitude, a shadow of his former self. The village was small and remote, and the people in the village who heard of his story offered little or no sympathy to him, viewing him as a cautionary tale. Simi, on the other hand, continued to thrive. She became a beacon of hope and strength for other women, as she shared her stories and helped other women to come out and live a life of freedom. The lesson in Simi's story is that you choose how your life would be. You don't have to stay in a toxic environment or relationship or with a toxic partner. Your dream is never too small to be a reality. Remember to take care of yourself because you owe yourself that.